Easy, it hurts, she whispered against the current. He did the unthinkable Wild West stories. Dust blew in lazy swirls down the main street, settling on the wooden porches and the worn signs that creaked in the wind. Life here moved slowly, but it moved with a rhythm that everyone knew and followed. People greeted each other with nods, exchanged smiles and small talk, and remembered birthdays, illnesses, and troubles as if every life in the town was connected by invisible threads. Nothing happened quickly in this town, and yet every little thing mattered deeply. Clara walked down the narrow street, her boots crunching softly on the dirt. She carried a basket filled with fresh bread and vegetables from the market. Even on days that seemed ordinary, she moved with purpose, as though she knew that in a town like this, small actions had weight. She was known by everyone in town. Some admired her courage, others her quiet beauty. Yet beneath the surface of her calm demeanor, there was a sadness that she carried alone. It was the kind of sadness that came from wanting more than life offered in this small town, but feeling trapped by its invisible walls. Clara often wondered what lay beyond the hills that surrounded their little settlement. Was the world outside as harsh and unforgiving as the stories told, or was it something different, something alive and full of possibilities? The river ran at the edge of the town, a constant presence, its waters glinting under the afternoon sun. It was Clara's favorite place. Sometimes she would walk along its banks for hours, letting the water's gentle rush soothe her restless thoughts. She liked the way it moved, relentless yet calm, cutting through the land like it had no care for boundaries or rules. Sitting by the river, she often whispered her dreams into the wind, hoping someone somewhere would hear them. Sometimes she imagined leaving everything behind, her family, the inn she helped manage, the small routine that defined her life, and venturing into the unknown. But even as she dreamed, fear held her back. The unknown was tempting, yes, but it was also dangerous. She wondered if she had the courage to truly step beyond the edges of her familiar world. It was during one of these walks that she first saw him. Elias. He was standing near the water, a stranger in a place where strangers rarely stayed long. There was something about him that made Clara pause. He wasn't like the other travelers who came through the town for a day or two. He carried himself with a quiet intensity, as if every step he took had meaning, as if he were carrying a story no one else could understand. His clothes were worn but well kept, and his eyes held a mixture of weariness and alertness, a kind of careful watchfulness that suggested he had seen more than most men his age. The first time Clara saw him, he looked at her without speaking, and for a moment she felt a strange connection. It was not love, not yet. It was curiosity and recognition, the sense that perhaps he too understood what it was like to carry a secret, a burden, or a dream. Clara found herself returning to the river more often, hoping to see him again. And she did. Day after day, he was there, sometimes fishing, sometimes just standing and looking at the water as if it could answer questions no one dared to ask aloud. At first, their conversations were short and simple. They spoke of the weather, the river, the occasional traveler passing through. But slowly, the words became more personal. Clara told him about the town, about the inn where she worked, and the quiet life she led. She didn't speak of the sadness she felt inside, not yet. Elias, in return, shared small fragments of his life, stories of towns he had passed through, of work he had done, of people he had known. He never spoke of the full weight of his past, only enough to hint at the complexity beneath the surface. The townsfolk noticed them. Some whispered. A young woman talking to a stranger. It was unusual, yes, but not necessarily dangerous. Still, the quiet town loved its gossip, and Clara could feel eyes on her when she walked past the main street in the morning or returned home after her walk by the river. But she didn't care. Something about Elias made the world feel wider, the town smaller, and the air lighter. When she was with him, even for a few minutes, She felt a part of something bigger than the dusty streets, the wooden porches, the endless routine. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara sat on the riverbank, tossing small pebbles into the water. The sound of the stones hitting the surface was soothing, a rhythm she could almost lose herself in. Elias joined her, sitting quietly a few feet away. For a long time, neither spoke. They just watched the river together, letting the silence build a bridge between them. Finally, Clara whispered something she hadn't said aloud to anyone before. "Easy, it hurts," she said, her voice soft, almost lost in the sound of the water. Elias turned to look at her. His eyes were full of understanding, though he didn't speak immediately. He simply nodded as if he knew exactly what she meant. And in that quiet acknowledgement, Clara felt seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't need him to offer advice, to make promises, or to fix her problems. She only needed someone to hear her, and in that moment he did. From that evening onward, their connection grew, not in grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but in small, meaningful moments. Shared smiles, quiet walks, the occasional laugh at a story or memory. Clara began to look forward to these moments, counting the hours until she could see him again. She found herself imagining what life could be like with someone who understood her so deeply, someone who seemed to mirror her own longing for more. Yet even as her heart leaned toward him, fear lingered. The town was small, and people noticed everything. Her family had expectations, and her life had boundaries that were not easily crossed. Elias, too, seemed to carry his own hesitations, shadows of a past that he did not yet reveal. But still, every day by the river chipped away at those fears, replaced by something else: hope, curiosity, and a sense of possibility that Clara hadn't felt in years. And so, in the quiet of the Wild West town, with dust settling on the streets and the river flowing endlessly at its edge, two lives began to intertwine. Neither could predict what would come next. Neither could know the challenges that lay ahead. But in those first encounters, in the shared silences and whispered words, something significant had begun. Something that would shape not only their days in the town, but the choices they would soon have to make, and the risks they would need to take to follow their hearts. Clara stayed by the river until the last light faded, reluctant to return to the predictable life of the town, yet comforted by the thought of seeing Elias again. As she walked home through the quiet streets, she felt a flicker of courage inside her, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, life could hold more than what she had always known. And in the back of her mind, she carried the words she had whispered aloud by the river, words that had somehow connected her to another soul in ways she could not yet fully understand. Easy, it hurts. That night, as Clara lay in bed, the sounds of the river still echoing in her ears, she dreamed of possibilities. She dreamed of walking beyond the hills, of seeing the world beyond the town, and of standing by someone who understood her in ways no one else could. And somewhere in the distance, she imagined Elias doing the same, perhaps thinking of her as she thought of him, two hearts quietly meeting against the current of ordinary life, ready to challenge the limitations that had always held them back. Clara returned to the river the very next day, as she had promised herself. The morning air was crisp, and the sunlight danced over the water, making it shimmer like tiny scattered diamonds. The town behind her seemed distant now, its wooden structures and dusty streets fading into a background that no longer felt confining. Here, by the river, she could think freely, and for a few hours, the weight of expectations and worries seemed to drift away like leaves carried on the current. Elias was already there when she arrived, sitting on a flat rock near the water's edge, skipping stones across the surface. He glanced up as she approached and gave a small, almost shy nod. That simple acknowledgement made her heart flutter. It was strange how a man she had only known for a few days could make her feel seen and understood in a way that years in the town never had. She smiled softly and sat a little distance from him, careful not to disturb the quiet rhythm he seemed to be in. The first few minutes were silent, the kind of silence that is comfortable rather than awkward. The river spoke for them, rushing past rocks and curving around bends, carrying the stories of places far beyond the town. Clara watched the water, feeling a strange sense of connection to it. The river moved freely, unafraid of boundaries, unafraid of what lay ahead. She wished she could feel the same, wishing she could step beyond the edges of her life without fear. Elias finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" He gestured at the river, like it doesn't care about anything else. Clara nodded, glancing at him. "It's peaceful, but it also feels unstoppable. You can't fight it, and sometimes it carries you somewhere you didn't intend to go." He smiled faintly. "Sounds like life." They laughed quietly together, a sound that felt out of place at first in the stillness but quickly became comforting. It was easy to talk to him. He listened without judgment, and even his silences seemed meaningful. Clara realized she had been craving this kind of connection for a long time. A person who could hear her without trying to change her. Someone who understood that sometimes words weren't enough to express what the heart felt. As days turned into weeks, Clara and Elias began meeting by the river regularly. They shared small details of their lives, little fragments that slowly painted a picture of who they were. Clara spoke of her family, her work at the inn, and the small joys she found in everyday life, like baking bread, helping guests, or simply watching the sun set behind the hills. She avoided the darker parts of her past, the moments that left her feeling weak or vulnerable, but she found comfort in the fact that she could reveal pieces of herself without fear of judgment. Elias, in turn, shared parts of his life carefully, choosing words that hinted at experiences he had endured without exposing the full weight of them. He spoke of towns he had traveled through, of work he had done that required both skill and courage, of people he had met who left lasting impressions. Clara noticed that his eyes often carried a shadow, a hint of something unspoken, yet he seemed to trust her with the fragments he did reveal. That trust made her heart swell with both warmth and protectiveness. One afternoon, the sky darkened with clouds and the wind picked up, rustling the leaves along the riverbank. Clara shivered slightly and wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Elias noticed immediately. "Cold?" he asked. "Yes," she admitted, smiling faintly. "It feels like the world is changing too fast." He chuckled softly, though his eyes remained serious. "Sometimes it does, but change isn't always bad. It can bring new things, things you didn't know you needed." Clara looked at him, realizing he spoke not only of the weather but also of life itself. She wondered what he meant by new things. Was he talking about adventure, freedom, or perhaps the connection growing between them? She felt a flutter in her chest, an unfamiliar feeling that was equal parts excitement and fear. As the weeks passed, their conversations deepened. They no longer spoke only of simple observations or small fragments of their lives. They began discussing dreams and desires, the kind that most people in the town kept locked away. Clara confided in him about her longing to see the world beyond the hills, to experience life beyond the quiet streets and familiar faces. "I feel like there's a part of me trapped here," she said one evening, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to let it go." Elias listened, nodding slowly. "I understand," he said. "Sometimes we're scared because the unknown seems bigger than we are. But maybe it isn't about being bigger. Maybe it's about taking the first step, even when your heart trembles." Her heart raced at his words. They were simple, yet they carried a weight that she couldn't ignore. She felt a strange sense of hope, a tiny spark that grew each time she was near him. Elias seemed to understand her in a way no one else did. And she began to wonder if, perhaps, he was waiting for her in the same way she was waiting for him, curious, cautious, and quietly hopeful. But even as their bond grew, life in the town remained a constant reminder of reality. Clara's family began to express concern over her frequent absences. Her parents worried she spent too much time with a stranger, a man they knew nothing about. "It's not safe," her mother said one evening, worry lining her face. "You don't know him, Clara. You shouldn't be wandering off alone." Clara tried to explain, but her words felt weak against their fears. "He's not just a stranger," she said softly. He understands me. He listens. I feel free when I'm with him." Her parents exchanged worried glances. They didn't understand what she felt, and she knew they never would. The expectations of the town, the rules of family, and the whispers of neighbors all pressed against her heart, reminding her of the life she was expected to lead. Yet in her mind, she replayed the moments by the river, the quiet smiles, the shared laughter, and the feeling of being truly seen. Those moments were precious and rare, and she wasn't willing to give them up easily. Elias, too, had his own reservations. His past was something he could not fully reveal, a story filled with decisions made out of necessity, choices that left marks on him he could not erase. He felt drawn to Clara, yet he feared that revealing too much would push her away. And so he remained careful, measured in his words and actions, hoping that time would allow them both to trust and understand each other more deeply. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the river with shades of gold and pink, Clara whispered again, almost to herself, "Easy, it hurts." Elias turned to her immediately. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. She took a deep breath, letting the words spill softly. "I mean, leaving the life I know, stepping into something unknown. It's easy to dream about it. But when you think about actually doing it, it hurts. It hurts to imagine leaving behind everything familiar, everything safe." He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Yes," he said, "I feel the same, but maybe the hurt isn't a warning, it's a sign. It means that what you're thinking about is real, that it matters." Clara looked at him, feeling a warmth in her chest. He didn't judge her fear. He didn't dismiss her feelings. He simply acknowledged them, and that acknowledgement was enough to make her heart feel lighter. She realized that sometimes connection wasn't about words or promises. It was about being present, truly present, in someone else's life. The days continued to pass, each one bringing them closer together. They explored the riverbank, finding quiet spots hidden among trees and rocks, laughing at small discoveries, sharing stories of their childhoods, and dreaming quietly of the future. And in those shared moments, Clara began to feel a courage she hadn't known she possessed. She was still afraid, yes, but she also felt hope. Hope that perhaps she could step beyond the boundaries of her life, and hope that Elias would be there beside her when she did. Even as the town continued its slow, predictable rhythm, Clara and Elias had created a world of their own by the river. A world where connection, understanding, and unspoken trust mattered more than rules, gossip, or fear. And though the challenges of the town and the unknown future still awaited them, in those quiet moments, they had found something rare, the feeling of being truly seen and understood. And so, as the sun set and the river whispered its endless song, Clara and Elias sat together, two souls quietly leaning toward one another, ready to face the currents of life and the unknown future, knowing that sometimes the greatest courage comes from simply allowing yourself to feel and to trust in someone else. Life in the small town continued its steady rhythm, but for Clara, nothing felt steady anymore. Her days at the inn carried on as usual, serving travelers and tending to chores, yet her mind often drifted to the river, to Elias, and to the dreams she had whispered to the wind. Something had shifted inside her. She felt a mixture of excitement, fear, and longing that she could not ignore. The quiet town that once felt comforting now felt constraining, like a cage with familiar bars. Elias, too, was affected by the stirrings of change. Though he carried the calm and patience of someone who had lived through many trials, there were moments when his eyes betrayed worry. He sensed that their growing connection, though beautiful, was not without challenges. Life in the town was predictable, but it was also full of expectations, expectations that neither of them fully belonged to. Trouble began to stir quietly at first. Travelers spoke of bandits spotted along the nearby trails, people with dangerous reputations who took what they wanted without warning. Rumors swirled through the town, carried in whispers across porches and marketplaces. The sheriff and a few local men started preparing defenses, warning the townsfolk to remain alert. For Clara, the news made her heart race. Danger was not something she had encountered often, yet the thought of trouble so close to home made her feel vulnerable, as if the peaceful life she knew could shatter at any moment. Meanwhile, her family began pressuring her more. Her parents worried that she spent too much time wandering by the river, that her frequent absences were inappropriate for a young woman of her standing. "You need to think about your future, Clara," her mother said one afternoon, her voice gentle but firm. "A suitable match, someone stable, someone who can keep you safe. You can't spend all your time chasing dreams and strangers." Clara nodded politely, but her heart resisted. She wanted to explain, to tell them about Elias, about the connection she felt, about the quiet moments of understanding that no one else could give her. But she knew they would not understand. To them, he was just a stranger, a wandering man with no ties to their community. They couldn't see the truth she saw, that Elias cared for her deeply, that he made her feel alive in a way that the town had never managed. Elias also felt the weight of the town's watchful eyes. He noticed the whispers as he walked through the streets or past the marketplace. People speculated about his past, judging him without knowing the truth. Some townsfolk were suspicious, questioning why he spent so much time near the river with Clara. Others were quietly curious, watching the quiet bond that had formed between the two of them. Elias knew that any misstep could cause trouble, not only for him but also for Clara. And so he continued to measure his words and actions carefully, wanting to protect her from judgment while still being present in her life. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned golden, Clara and Elias met by the river as usual. The water reflected the fading light, shimmering with hues of amber and rose. Clara tossed pebbles into the current, each small splash echoing softly against the riverbank. She was quiet at first, her thoughts heavy with the pressure she felt from her family and the rumors of danger in the town. Elias watched her silently for a moment before speaking. "You've been quiet," he said gently. "Is something bothering you?" Clara hesitated, then sighed. "It's everything," she admitted. "The town, my family, the bandits, I feel like life is pulling me in all directions and I don't know which way to go." He nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Life does that," he said softly. "It pulls and pushes. Sometimes it feels like we're being carried along by currents we can't control." Clara looked at him, feeling a rush of gratitude. He always seemed to understand her feelings without judgment, without impatience. I don't want to disappoint anyone," she whispered. "But I also don't want to give up on what I feel, what I dream of. I don't know how to balance it all." Elias reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said. "Sometimes it's enough to acknowledge what you feel, to face it, and to make small choices that move you closer to who you want to be." Clara felt her heart swell. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that lifted some of her fear. She realized that courage was not about ignoring fear, but about facing it step by step, trusting that the right path would become clearer with time. But that evening, the sense of unease in the town grew stronger. A group of bandits had been seen closer than anyone had expected, and the sheriff organized a patrol to keep watch along the river and the outskirts of the town. Clara and Elias could see the tension on the faces of the townspeople, the worry in their voices, the hurried steps in the marketplace. Even the familiar streets seemed different, as if the dust itself carried a warning. Clara's family insisted she stay inside that night, worried about her safety. She reluctantly obeyed, feeling a mix of frustration and fear. She wanted to be near Elias, to feel the calm reassurance of his presence, yet she also understood her parents' concern. The sense of danger was real, even if she felt confident near the river with him. Elias, meanwhile, could not stay away. He patrolled the riverbank, keeping watch from a distance, ensuring that Clara and the town were safe. Though he did not reveal himself, his presence brought a silent comfort. Clara sensed it somehow, a feeling of protection that eased her anxiety. The river, their meeting place, had become not only a sanctuary of connection, but also a place of vigilance and care. During the following days, the bandits remained a looming threat, though they had not yet attacked the town. The tension forced both Clara and Elias to confront realities they had not fully faced before. Clara began to realize that life outside the town, though filled with possibility, was not without danger. Freedom and adventure carried their own risks, just as staying in the safety of the familiar could feel suffocating. Their conversations by the river became more serious. They spoke of courage and choice, of facing fear and uncertainty. Clara shared her deepest dreams of leaving the town, of seeing the world beyond the hills. Elias spoke cautiously of his past, hinting at experiences that had taught him resilience, trust, and the importance of careful decision-making. Both realized that the world was bigger than their small town, that life could be beautiful and cruel in equal measure, and that the bond they shared was growing stronger because of the trust they placed in each other. Yet, despite the danger and the pressure from their surroundings, Clara could not ignore the pull of her heart. She found herself thinking about Elias constantly, imagining the moments they would share, the quiet evenings by the river, and the feeling of being understood in ways no one else could offer. His presence had become a lifeline, a reminder that even in uncertainty, there could be comfort and hope. One evening, the river flowed faster than usual, swollen from recent rains. The wind carried a chill, and the sky was dark with heavy clouds. Clara walked along the bank, lost in thought, when she noticed a branch in the water. The current was strong, more dangerous than it appeared. She paused, realizing how easily it could sweep someone away. The thought sent a shiver through her, a mix of fear and awareness that life, just like the river, could change in an instant. Elias, noticing the shift in the water, stepped closer to her. "Be careful," he warned gently. "The current is stronger than it looks." Clara nodded, grateful for his caution. "I know," she said softly, her eyes on the flowing water. "It reminds me life is like this river, calm one moment and then unpredictable the next." He smiled faintly, understanding the metaphor she had intended. "And we have to choose how we navigate it," he said. "Sometimes we have to be cautious. Sometimes we have to trust ourselves and each other to stay afloat." Clara looked at him, feeling a mixture of fear, hope, and trust. She realized that the river had become more than a meeting place. It was a symbol of their connection, of the challenges they would face, and of the courage they would need to navigate the currents of life. And so, as the sun set and the river glimmered under the fading light, Clara and Elias sat together, watching the water flow endlessly. The bandits, the town, the expectations of family, all of it felt distant, replaced by a shared understanding that whatever came next, they would face it together. Their bond had deepened, strengthened by the pressures and uncertainties that surrounded them, and they both sensed that the moments of danger and tension were preparing them for the choices that would soon demand courage beyond anything they had yet experienced. In those quiet moments, Clara understood something important. Life was not just about safety or comfort. It was about connection, trust, and the willingness to step into the unknown, even when it hurt. And in Elias, she had found someone who could walk beside her, someone who understood the currents of her heart and the storms of her mind. Together, they had begun to navigate the river of life, uncertain of what lay ahead, but certain that they would face it together. The days that followed were filled with tension in the town, though the river remained calm, a deceptive mirror of serenity. Clara found herself walking there more often, needing the quiet and the presence of Elias to steady her thoughts. She could feel the pressures of the town growing heavier with each passing day. Her family worried incessantly about her safety. Whispers of bandits lingered in the marketplace, and curious eyes followed her every step. Yet no matter how heavy the world felt, the river seemed to offer a momentary refuge, a place where time slowed and she could simply breathe. Elias was always there, waiting silently, patient and calm as ever. Sometimes he would fish, other times he would simply sit and watch the water, but his presence alone brought Clara comfort. She noticed small details she hadn't before, the way his hands moved when he skipped stones, the steady gaze he carried, even the faint scar along his jaw that hinted at experiences he did not speak of. She had grown to trust him in ways she had never trusted anyone else, and the thought of the river without him seemed almost unbearable. One afternoon, the river ran higher than usual, swollen by recent rains in the hills. The normally gentle current had become stronger, swirling against the banks with unexpected force. Clara wandered closer to the edge, reaching down to retrieve a small item she had dropped, a handkerchief that had slipped from her pocket during her walk. The water rushed around her fingers as she tried to grab it, and for a moment she lost her footing. The river was merciless. A sudden, stronger surge of water knocked her balance, and she stumbled, her foot slipping on the muddy bank. Panic surged through her as she tried to catch herself, but the current was too strong. In an instant, she felt herself being pulled into the icy water, the river dragging her with a force she hadn't anticipated. She gasped, the cold shock stealing her breath, and fear gripped her heart. For a moment, she struggled to understand how quickly the familiar river had turned into something dangerous, something threatening to take her away. Elias, who had been watching from a distance, noticed immediately. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward her, boots slipping on the wet mud as he lunged forward. He didn't pause to consider the danger, didn't calculate the risk. All that mattered was Clara, struggling against the powerful current, her small frame no match for the water's strength. He reached the edge, plunged in, and fought the swirling water with a strength born of desperation and care. The townsfolk who had been nearby on errands or tending their businesses stopped in shock. Some called out, their voices lost in the roar of the river, while others rushed toward the edge, unsure how to help. But Elias was focused entirely on Clara. He reached her just as the current pulled her beneath a small wave, grabbing her arm and holding on with all his strength. The water was relentless, trying to separate them, but he anchored himself, determined to save her. Clara's heart pounded as fear and relief collided. She clutched his arm tightly, trusting him completely, even as the water churned around them. "Elias," she shouted, her voice trembling with panic. I can't." "You can," he yelled over the roar of the river. "Hold on, I've got you." With careful, steady movements, Elias guided her toward the shallow part of the river, using every ounce of his strength and skill to counter the current. The mud threatened to pull them both under at times, and the rushing water lashed against their faces, but he refused to let go. He kept his focus on her, drawing on reserves of courage and determination that seemed limitless. Every step, every motion was calculated, yet driven by a single, unwavering purpose, to save her life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the safety of the riverbank. Clara collapsed onto the mud, shivering violently, the shock of the water running through her body. Elias knelt beside her, his own clothes soaked, his chest heaving from the effort. He looked at her with a mixture of relief, concern, and exhaustion. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, brushing mud from her face. Clara, still trembling, nodded weakly. I think so," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tears streamed down her face, not from pain, but from the overwhelming relief of being alive and safe. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and in that moment she realized the depth of what he had done. He had risked everything, ignored danger, and put her life above his own. The townsfolk who had gathered watched in awe, unable to comprehend the courage they had just witnessed. Some murmured in admiration, others in disbelief. They had known Elias was brave, but this act of selflessness, was something beyond what words could describe. It was not just courage, it was care, it was devotion, it was love expressed through action rather than speech. Clara finally stood with Elias' help, her legs weak but steady. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, and looked at him with eyes full of gratitude and something deeper, a realization of feelings she could no longer deny. You saved me," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. I don't know how to thank you." Elias smiled faintly, though exhaustion showed in the lines of his face. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "I did what anyone would do, what anyone should do. You're worth it." The words, though simple, struck her deeply. It wasn't the words alone. It was the act, the risk, the determination. In that moment, Clara understood something profound. Some truths are spoken not in sentences, but in actions, in moments that defy reason and expectation. Elias had shown her the strength of the human heart, the courage to act when it matters most, even when fear is present. As the water settled and the river returned to its calm, gentle flow, Clara and Elias walked slowly back toward the town, side by side. Their clothes were soaked, their bodies chilled, but the connection between them had never been stronger. Every step carried a silent understanding. They had faced danger together, and that shared experience had forged a bond that neither time nor circumstance could easily break. That night, Clara could not sleep. She replayed the events of the day over and over in her mind, marveling at the courage and care Elias had shown. She thought about the fleeting nature of life, how quickly everything could change, and how precious moments of trust and connection truly were. She realized that fear, though terrifying, could also reveal the strength and depth of human emotion. And she knew, without a doubt, that her feelings for Elias had grown beyond admiration or friendship. They had deepened into something profound, something that could no longer be ignored. Elias, too, lay awake that night, thinking about the river, the town, and Clara. He had faced danger countless times in his life, but none had felt so immediate, so vital, so tied to the well-being of someone he truly cared for. The act of saving her had not only tested his courage, but it had also strengthened his resolve. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with Clara by his side if she chose to trust him. And he silently promised himself that he would do everything in his power to protect her, to stand beside her, and to honor the bond that had grown between them by the river. The next morning, the town buzzed with quiet admiration. People spoke of the bravery they had witnessed, of Elias' unthinkable act, and of the miraculous survival of Clara. For many, it became a story to remember, a tale of courage, trust, and devotion. For Clara and Elias, it became a turning point, a moment that would shape not only their feelings but also the choices they would soon face. As they returned to the river in the following days, their meetings carried a new weight and depth. Words were no longer necessary to express their trust and connection. Every glance, every gesture, every shared moment carried the memory of what had happened, the knowledge that courage, care, and love could manifest in the most unexpected ways. The river, once a place of quiet reflection, had become a symbol of survival, trust, and the unspoken bond that now tied them together. And so, in the quiet Wild West town, amidst the whispers of danger, the pressures of expectation, and the slow rhythm of everyday life, Clara and Elias discovered something extraordinary. That true courage is not measured by absence of fear, but by the willingness to act in spite of it. That trust and connection can emerge even in the face of uncertainty, and that sometimes the unthinkable act, the leap into danger for someone you care about, reveals the deepest truths of the human heart. The days after the river incident were filled with a quiet sense of wonder and relief. Life in the town slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but for Clara and Elias, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The events by the river had changed them, had shifted something deep inside, and both could feel it. Clara no longer viewed the world through the same cautious lens. She had seen what courage and care looked like in action. And Elias, who had always carried the weight of his past quietly, felt the bond between them grow stronger, unshakable even in the face of whispers and judgment. Clara's family, initially anxious and worried, began to understand the depth of their connection. Though her parents still worried about her safety, the townsfolk's admiration for Elias' bravery eased their fears. They had witnessed his courage and selflessness, and they could no longer dismiss him as a stranger. Clara felt a quiet pride, knowing that the man she trusted so deeply had proven himself in a way that words alone could not. Elias, for his part, remained modest. He did not seek praise or recognition. What mattered to him was Clara's safety, her happiness, and the trust that had grown between them. Every meeting by the river, every conversation, every shared silence reminded him why he had risked everything to save her. It was not an act of heroism in his mind. It was simply what needed to be done. But he realized, too, that the act had created a bond that neither time nor circumstance could break. As the river flowed gently past the town, Clara and Elias continued their visits, though the dynamic had shifted. There was a quiet intimacy in the air, a mutual understanding that transcended words. They could communicate through glances, gestures, and the simple presence of one another. Every shared laugh, every whispered thought, every moment of quiet reflection deepened the trust and affection between them. Clara found herself thinking about the future in ways she hadn't dared to before. She imagined a life beyond the town, beyond the familiar streets and expectations. And for the first time, she believed that such a life might be possible. But the world beyond the riverbank still held challenges. The memory of the bandits, though distant now, reminded them both that life could change in an instant. The town, for all its safety and routine, was not immune to danger. Clara felt the weight of this reality, yet she also felt the courage that had been ignited in her the day Elias had saved her. She knew that moving forward would require not just trust, but decisive action, and she was ready to face it. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with warm hues of orange and gold, Clara and Elias sat by the river, watching the water ripple and dance in the fading light. Clara broke the comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about leaving the town," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of fear and hope. Elias turned to her, his eyes steady and calm. "Do you mean to explore beyond the hills?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, I've dreamed of it for so long, but I was afraid. Afraid of leaving everything familiar, afraid of what I might lose. But now I feel like I have a chance to take that step, and I don't want to waste it." He reached out and took her hand gently, holding it with a reassuring grip. "You're stronger than you realize," he said quietly. "The courage you've shown, the trust you've placed in me, it's proof. You can do this, and you don't have to do it alone." Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from fear but from the overwhelming sense of possibility. For the first time, she truly believed that the life she had imagined, full of adventure, freedom, and connection, was within reach. And the thought that Elias would be by her side made the prospect not just bearable but joyful. Over the next few days, they began making plans. They spoke quietly of where they might go, what they might see, and how they would face the challenges ahead. It was not a reckless decision. It was a carefully considered step, built on trust, courage, and mutual understanding. Clara felt a sense of empowerment she had never known before. The river, which had been a place of quiet reflection and connection, had become a symbol of the new path she was ready to take. The townsfolk, once wary, began to offer their support. Some provided advice, Others offered supplies or directions for travel. Clara's family, while still concerned, recognized the sincerity of Elia's intentions and the depth of his care for their daughter. Slowly, they came to accept that the choice Clara was making was not a fleeting whim, but a carefully considered decision guided by courage and trust. When the day came for them to leave, the town gathered quietly to see them off. There were no grand gestures or dramatic farewells, just the understanding nods of those who had witnessed the bond that had grown between them, the quiet respect for the bravery they had both shown in facing life's challenges. Clara felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement as she stepped onto the path that led beyond the familiar hills. Every step carried a sense of liberation, a release from the constraints that had once held her back. Elias walked beside her, steady and unwavering. He carried little more than a small pack of essentials, but his presence was a comfort stronger than any material possession. Together, they moved forward, leaving behind the town that had shaped them but no longer defined them. The river, now behind them, seemed to sparkle in memory, a reminder of the moments that had led to this new beginning, the laughter, the whispered words, and the unthinkable act that had cemented their trust and connection. As they journeyed, Clara felt a sense of exhilaration she had never known. The world beyond the town was vast and unpredictable, filled with challenges and wonders she had only imagined. And yet, the fear that might have once held her back was tempered by the knowledge that she was not alone. Elia's steady presence, his unwavering support, and the courage they had both discovered in each other gave her strength. Every step forward was a testament to the trust they had built and the courage they had nurtured together. Along the way, they encountered new towns, travelers, and experiences that broadened their understanding of the world. They faced challenges, rough terrain, unpredictable weather, and occasional misunderstandings, but each challenge strengthened their bond. They learned to rely on each other, to communicate without words, and to face difficulties with patience and understanding. Clara discovered that the world, while unpredictable, was also filled with beauty, opportunity, and moments of joy that far exceeded her imagination. Through it all, the memory of the river, the place where trust had been tested and courage proven, remained with them. It was a reminder that life's greatest challenges often reveal its most profound truths, that connection and love are forged in moments of risk and care, and that the choices made with courage and trust can lead to a life more fulfilling than any dream alone could offer. Eventually, as the sun set on another day of their journey, Clara and Elias found a quiet hill overlooking a valley that stretched as far as the eye could see. They sat together, watching the colors of the sky shift and fade, and Clara realized that this sense of freedom, trust, and shared purpose was exactly what she had been longing for. She turned to Elias, gratitude and love shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled softly, taking her hand. "No, thank you, for trusting me, for taking this step, for choosing to live boldly." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the vastness of the world and the promise of endless possibilities, Clara understood that life's greatest adventures are not only found in the places we go, but in the courage we summon, the trust we build, and the connections we nurture. Along the way, she had left the town, yes, but more importantly, she had embraced a life filled with hope, love, and the certainty that together, she and Elias could face whatever lay ahead. Their story, which began by a quiet river in a small Wild West town, had transformed into a journey of trust, courage, and connection. It was a story of facing fears, taking risks, and discovering that the unthinkable acts of care and bravery can change the course of life forever. And as they continued their journey, step by step, the river, the town, and the challenges they had faced became a part of them, a quiet reminder that true courage and true love can endure no matter the currents of life.